Okay, so in this video, and hopefully I'll try to make it as short as possible, I'm going to begin a series of going over Roman history. And so in this one, I hope to go from the very founding of Rome on April 21st, 753 BC, all the way to 265 BC, where Rome is then poised to begin to expand beyond the Italian peninsula. And so we're going to be looking back to this in a moment. I apologize for it being on a tilt. But in your Latin 1 book, there are several pages that cover these sections. Not in the great detail that I will in just a moment. But about the founding of Rome, look on page 85. It's only a couple of pages that you can read all about it. The monarchy in page 109, which comes to an end when they boot out the last of the kings in 510, establishing in the year 509 BC the Res Publica. During the early parts of the Res Publica, in which you can learn about the early heroes that immediately emerge right at the founding of the Res Publica on page 141, you have two things going on grand total. One is that you have a conflict of the orders. That is going to be a domestic dispute between the patrician class and the plebeian class. And then, of course, there is all of this which will result in the conquest of Italy. So inside of Roman civilization and then outside of Roman civilization. We're going to encounter various people known as Coriolanus, Cincinnatus, the Gauls who will invade in 390, the Samnite Wars in those years, the Pyrrhic Wars in those years, then stopping, of course, at 265. Of course, in page 168 of Ecce Romani, you can read all about the early days of the Res Publica, and then Rome becomes a world leader in page 244. But I'll hopefully be able to cover most of those that you can follow along. As per usual, what I'm going to do is, while we are going through all of this, I'll have various different embedded items that I'll be saying from time to time that will gain you a easy free 100 if you just simply put them in a proved Canvas quiz. First and foremost, you need to probably have a copy of the Roman History Study Guide. I read a Roman history book several years back, and I created a study guide that is going to, of course, be a distilled kind of a summary of all the major people, events, and other sorts of things that one finds in a Roman history textbook, and this is obviously what you have. I have, and this is what I'll be going through, a companion PowerPoint that follows along with the study guide, which you should always have on hand as you are watching these videos, that then you can obviously use as a kind of thing that you can take notes on, and otherwise when you are hopefully trying to learn this stuff when you are preparing for whatever competition you might be preparing for. So let's go ahead and begin from the then current slide, which is right there. Roman history begins on April 21st, 753 BC. You should know, however, previous to that, you have the story of Aeneas, who comes from the Trojan War to found the Latin race. He will marry Lavinia. And so when you have the marriage between Aeneas, let's go with red, I think. So there it is. Aeneas with the woman whom he will marry in Italy, which is named Lavinia. They then have a child together whose name is going to be Aeneas Silvius. And he is going to establish Aeneas the town of Lavinium, named after his wife. His other son from his previous marriage to Creusa is going to obviously establish a new city that, of course, I'm talking about Ascanius, also known as Iulus. After the fall of Troy, he gains that second name, which is known as Alba Longa. And it is the city of Alba Longa that is going to be ruled over by all the descendants of Aeneas Silvius and, of course, Ascanius, until eventually you get to a fellow by the name of Procas. Once you get to Procas, he has a couple of children whose names are going to be Numitor and, of course, Amulius. What is going to happen with those two guys is that they are brothers and they are going to quarrel over the rule of Alba Longa. So once they are quarreling over the rule of Alba Longa, evil Numitor is going to boot out I got that wrong, I'm so sorry. Evil Amulius is going to boot out his brother Numitor, who had a daughter by the name of Rhea Silvia. That daughter of course, Numitor, Rhea Silvia, and you can see, obviously, from that line of the Silviuses, she is going to be a threat to her evil uncle Amulius, who has booted out his brother Numitor, because any descendant that she has might have a claim upon the throne of Alba Longa. And so, therefore, she is going to be made what is known as a Vestal Virgin. A Vestal Virgin are the attendants to the goddess Vesta. Vesta, excuse me, is the goddess of the hearth, the home's fireplace, as it were. And likewise, they are virgins, meaning that they can never have children. What is inevitably going to happen as she is locked away, forced to be a Vestal Virgin, is she is going to be raped by the god Mars, and 2 children are going to be born. Those 2 children are named Romulus and Remus. Wanting to get rid of Romulus and Remus, what, of course, the evil Amulius is going to do is that he is going to set them afloat in the Tiber River, Tiber. This is the site where Rome will be one day. In the Tiber River, they are then going to be discovered by a she-wolf, a lupa, and they are going to be kept long enough alive until finally they can be discovered by a shepherd. The name of the shepherd that is going to find them and raise them is going to be none other than Faustulus and his wife Occularentia. Now, Faustulus and Occularentia, there are many historians in ancient Rome that will suggest, particularly the historian Livy, that a she-wolf is not really a she-wolf, that the lupa was a term for a woman of ill repute, a prostitute as it were, and that it was the prostitute Occularentia that had raised them. Regardless, they grow up and they are wanting to establish their uncle back to the throne. I'm leaving out lots of details. They become cattle rustlers, cattle thieves, but ultimately they are going to establish their uncle Numitor back to the throne of Alba Longa, thereby obviously then getting rid of Amulius and now their grandfather back in the spot of where they, of course, want him to be. They, however, are not going to want to then rule over Alba Longa. They are going to go to the site where they had been put into the Tiber River and establish the city of Rome. That is why it is called Rome. Nevertheless, they then, as they are building the walls, need to decide who the city is going to be named after and who will become the first king, because that is what you have, and you can see it on your study guide, a list of the first 7 kings. Now, there are 2 stories. The historian Livy, whom I mentioned previously, indicates that as they were building the walls, one of the brothers, Remus, is going to jump over them and say, "Look, Romulus, I have already destroyed or already invaded your city." Well, being overwhelmed with anger, because you certainly don't invade Rome, he immediately kills his brother. Other versions of the story indicate that a good friend of Romulus by the name of Celer is going to be the fellow who hits Remus in the head with a shovel, and Celer then becomes the first of the Celeres, a personal bodyguard to said emperor, or to said King Romulus, as it were. Another version of the story is the one that you see here, in which they both are going to go to 2 separate hills. Romulus will go to the Palatine, and because the Romans are so obsessively interested in the flights of birds and determining what we call the auspices from the flights of birds, they each are going to determine how many vultures they sight. Romulus claims to sight 12, his brother 6, a fight will ensue, and Romulus ends up killing Remus. Regardless, these twin boys are the founders of Rome, but Romulus is the one that will become the very first king. Now, as I said before, it is rather easy that you can follow along with the study guide that I pointed out previously, the one that you can see, hopefully, that you have a copy of right here. You can see them all listed out. Romulus, Numa Pompilius, Tullus Hostilius, Ancus Marcius. If you were to draw a line, that line would be drawn right there. Excuse me. That is because the first 4 are rather convenient and they are more legendary than based in historical fact. That is because every single one of them provides a certain essential element to the civilization of Rome, whereas those that are beyond the 4 mark, 5, 6, and 7, actually have their background in Etruria, which we know historically was the region north of Rome that came to dominate Rome at that time period. We can tell from the archaeology as well as the other historical sources. But you can see them all listed out here for you, and you need to make sure that you know not only what their names were, but what they are going to then be responsible for as a part of adding to the Roman civilization. So, going back to what we have here, let's go through them each one by one and what they are going to contribute. Your first word that you'll be putting in for the easy 100 is going to be Romulus. R-O-M-U-L-U-S. Romulus. Now, Romulus and his men are in need, excuse me, of a population. And so they go to the nearby group that lives near them in a region of the Sabine country, and they invite all of the Sabine men and their daughters to a set of plays to be watched. At the right moment, Romulus gives the symbol or signal, and he then says, grab them, and the Roman men grab the Sabine women. It is called the rape of the Sabines. Rapio rapere means to grab, as it were. A war is going to ensue, as one would imagine. Romulus is going to be the leader and the king of the Romans, and the Sabines are going to be led by Titus Tatius, their king. They are wanting to get onto the Capitoline. The Capitoline is the first and most important hill. It is the citadel that you would defend the whole city of Rome from. They are trying to get onto that hill. They see a woman by the name of Tarpeia. They promise to Tarpeia that, indeed, they will give her whatever she wants if they let them on the hill past the gate. She says that she likes the shiny things that are on their arm. She was looking at their bracelets, but when she opens the gate, she is crushed to death by their shields. She gives them their shields, and so, as the first traitor of Rome, she is taken to the top of the Capitol line by the Romans and thrown off of what we know of as the Tarpeian Rock. It is also during this time, and there you can see the Sabines all storming the Capitol, crushing her poor self with those shields that you see there. This is an incredibly famous painting, and there in the background you can see, of course, the Tarpeian Rock. Nevertheless, moving on, we have, obviously, the story from this element of the Sabine War of Medius Curtius, who rode his horse into a crack in the earth. He was told that you should throw into this hole to save the whole of your army the greatest thing that you have. And he said, "It is my fighting spirit and courage." And so therefore he rode it into the earth, and in the middle of the downtown area of Rome, which one day would become such, he is then going to have what we know as the Lacus Curtius, or the Curtius Lake. Eventually, all of the Sabine women bring it into the Sabine War by then running to the Romans and running to the Sabines and saying, "We don't want to become orphans," looking at the Sabine fathers, and widows, looking at the Romans. Apparently they had fallen in love with the Romans in that short amount of time. Romulus is going to be deified, or experience an apotheosis. That means becoming a god, and he becomes what we know as the god Quirinus. His wife, Hersilia, is going to become the goddess Hora, as it were. And upon their death, it is said that Romulus might be taken up to Mount Olympus, or wherever, by the gods, or it could have been that he was merely assassinated by the group of advisors that he has. He establishes that as the first king, what we know of as the Roman Senatores, or the Roman Senate, if you would like. Your second king of Rome is going to be Numa Pompilius. He is going to be known as the founder of Roman religion. So you can see that whereas Romulus gets a population, you're going to have then Numa Pompilius gathering for the Romans their religious institutions and their cultural civic institutions and the like. He is going to be advised by Egeria, who happens to be a nymph, as it were, and in that way he will, like I say, establish Roman religion. Numa Pompilius. Ruler number 3, king number 3, is Tullus Hostilius. As his name is, of course, implied, he is the founder of the census, because the census exists so that you can draft men into the army. Hostilius. He also is the establishment, or the establisher, of the Roman Curia. That is the Senate House that you can see there. This is not the original one, but probably the 11th or 12th iteration, but nevertheless, the Curia from ancient Rome still exists in the Roman form amongst all of the ruins. He is going to be responsible for conquering Alba Longa. Remember, that is the mother city of Rome that was established originally by our guys, Ascanius, the son of Aeneas, and Aeneas Silvius, the other son of Aeneas as well. In this fight between the Alba Longans and the Romans, you have the determining fight between two sets of triplets. One are going to be the 3 Romans, known as the Horatii, Horatius I, Horatius II, Horatius III, and the Curiatii, which of course is going to be Curatius I, Curiatius II, and Curiatius III. A famous painting by Jacques-Louis David shows the 3 Horatian brothers are all giving an oath saying that they will defend Rome unto the death. And in a show of pietas, at the end of the fight, one of them ends up killing his sister, because his sister had apparently made the goo-goo eye, or the love eye, towards one of those Curiatii brothers. The 2 Horatii are going to be killed, and the third one then, by having a strategy of running around, eventually is going to defeat all 3 of the Curiatii, and therefore Rome will become the ultimate winner, and now Rome has a little bit of territorial expansion to include its father-mother city of that of Alba Longa. You have the next king, which is going to be that of Ancus Marcus. And so Ancus Marcius, king number 4, is going to establish 2 things. The number 1 thing that he is going to establish is going to be the port known as Ostia. Rome is not on the actual Mediterranean, and so it actually has a port city that it uses as its port, known as Ostia, and it is going to be that he is going to build a bridge known as the Pons Sublicius. So here is Ostia. Later, of course, hundreds of years later, the Emperor Claudius, and then another 100 years later, the Emperor Trajan are going to extend it. There's the original port of Ostia, and then later on it was made into an expanded port. But the other thing he's going to build is Pons Sublicius. Now, there's a moment I must make commentary in that if I were to get in my time machine and go back into ancient Italy, I would not have put my money on the Romans as being the dominating factor for the next several hundred years. I would have put my money on the people that would grow to engulf the entirety of Italy, and then all of the Mediterranean, the people who lived right north of the Tiber River. North of the Tiber River is the area known as Etruria. We call it Tuscany today. And the Etruscans were a much more advanced civilization. And this is where we get into the historical fact of the last 3 kings of Rome, number 5, 6, and 7. We do know that some of the later kings, and we don't even say historically that there were only 7. We are saying 7 because that's what the Romans themselves give us as a number, but nevertheless, they cannot be trusted or believed because they would have gotten it wrong most likely. But at any rate, that the last king of Rome, we do know from historical sources and from archaeology sources that they were of Etruscan origin. And it starts out with this fellow by the name of Lucumo. He is going to come to Rome. He was going to take the throne from Ancus Marcius via a coup, as it were, and he will gain a new name known as Tarquinius Priscus because he is from Tarquinia, a particular city. He is driven, much like Macbeth, by Lady Macbeth, by his wife Tanaquil, who is the one that is driving his political ambitions to become the ruler of Rome as a whole, as it were. Well, unfortunately, he is going to be assassinated by the sons of Ancus Marcius, who, as the 4th king of Rome, had been deposed and his throne usurped by, of course, Tarquinius Superbus, leading then to the next 6th king of Rome, who is going to be of humble origins. He had been, at one point, some of his family slaves. You would see it in his very first name. He was the son-in-law of course, Tarquinius Priscus, and he will then come into power with 2 daughters. They are going to be known as Tullia, and so we cannot confuse her with the other Tullia, as Tullia Minor, the elder, and Tullia Minor, the younger. Now, Tullia Minor is going to marry their cousin, whose name is going to be Tarquinius as well, and Tullia Minor is going to marry Aruns. Well, the thing is that Tarquinius over here, married to the good Tullia Minor, is going to kill Tullia Minor. She's a goner. And Tullia Minor is going to kill her husband Aruns, or engineer his death. And so therefore you have Tullia Minor married to Tarquinius. Now, in this marriage, the people within the same larger family, as it were, you will then find dastardly behavior, because what the problem is going to be is that Tullia is going to want her husband to overthrow her own father. However, to go back, there is also something attributed to the Romans by Servius Tullius. He builds the first walls that are going to encompass all 7 hills of Rome, and they are known, of course, as the Servian walls, and here you can see some of the remnants of what we know of as the Servian walls. He also is going to build what we know as the Tullianum, or the Mamertine prison. It is not a prison in the way that we think of prisons in our society, but rather a holding place for those that are either going to be on trial, or a holding place for those that are obviously convicted and going to be assassinated. In ancient Rome, they did not believe in long-term incarceration of people. And so she will declare her husband at a meeting of the Senate to be the next king of Rome. And as a matter of fact, when her father, Servius Tullius, runs out into the street trying to stop it all, she runs him over with the chariot. And so you can see it depicted here in art, and there it is as well, of Tullia Minor killing her father, running him over, obviously, with her new husband, the 7th and final king of Rome. He takes as his regnal name, his king name, Tarquinius Superbus, and he will do a whole bunch. 1, he will drain the Forum of Rome, and thus indeed create the Forum by using the sewer known as the Cloaca Maxima. He also, on top of the Capitoline Hill, is going to build the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, sometimes called the Capitoline Triad. That is because when you look at it, it has 3 doors. The middle door is going to be that to Jupiter, one of the doors is going to be that of his wife, of course, Juno, and then the 3rd door is going to be that of Jupiter's daughter, Minerva, as it were. It will be the greatest temple that the Romans are going to have. However, he is proud, Superbus, and so therefore, when the Sibylline, or I should say the Cumaean Sibyl, that same priestess of Apollo, but now probably 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 or 15 generations later, a girl will die as the priest of Apollo, priestess as it were, the Cumaean Sibyl, and another girl will then replace her and take her place. Well, at any rate, came to Rome with what was known as the Sibylline books. These are the books that are going to have all of the prophecies of Rome and all of the future of Rome laid out within it, and so therefore, she offers a certain price for all 9. He rejects it. She throws 3 books into the fire, comes back with 6 more. He rejects it, and then comes back, and finally, having his pride overwhelmed by his advisors, it is going to be that he will accept 3 books at the original price of the 9. But unfortunately, so much of the future of Rome and so much of the prophecy of Rome lost, obviously. And so therefore, it is going to be then near to the last straw. The last straw is going to be that Sextus Tarquinius, the son of the king, is going to rape a girl by the name of Lucretia. When he does this, of course, terrible, terrible act, abusing the power that he has, and I'm leaving out several details of obviously the political machinations, but you don't need to worry about it as of now, is going to be that they are going to rise up. She happens to be the wife of his cousin Tarquinius Collatinus. When Collatinus is going to learn of what happens, and out of her overwhelming stress, Lucretia then commits suicide. It is the force that is going to cause the Romans to overthrow the king. And so in the year 510 BC, the Roman monarchy comes to an end when they boot out the last king of Rome, who is of course going to be that of Tarquinius Superbus. We come to the second word that you need to put in, which is Superbus. S-U-P-E-R-B-U-S. Superbus. It means proud. S-U-P-E-R-B-U-S, the seventh and final king of Rome. Now, what will immediately therein happen is that he, Tarquinius Superbus, is going to flee to the north to Etruria. He is going to go to a place known as, or the king Lars Porsenna, and that king Lars Porsenna is going to be all too eager to help out our fellow Tarquinius Superbus gain the throne, because Lars Porsenna, this king in Etruria, the king of a place called Clusium, is thinking that he might be able to obviously slip in as the new ruler of this up-and-coming prosperous city, as it were. It is at this point we learn about the early Roman heroes. You can read about these rather well written and succinctly so on page 141 in your Ecce Romani book, in which it talks about the following people. When Lars Porsenna is going to come and fight after the king has been kicked out by Brutus and Collatinus, they are going to, in the following year of 509, right after the kicking out in 510, set up the new government known as the Res Publica, and they will become the first two consuls. That is, that in ancient Rome you have two co-ruling, like co-presidents, and they are known as consuls, and Brutus and Collatinus are going to become the first. Please remember later on down the line that there will be another Brutus who also is going to see himself as a king expeller, as it were. So, these are the great heroes of the early days, right in the aftermath of the kicking out of the king. The first guy is going to be Horatius Cocles. As Lars Porsenna and his men were bearing down on the bridge across the Tiber to enter into Rome, the Pons Sublicius, as built by Ancus Marcius, it is going to be Horatius Cocles, Horatius, who bravely tells all the Romans, go back over to the Roman side to safety, I will defend the bridge unto my death. He then says, destroy the bridge so that the enemy's army, Lars Porsenna army, and the Etruscans cannot come across. And so therefore, he is obviously going to sacrifice himself, but at the last very moment he swims across the Tiber over to safety himself, but had defended that bridge, and so that's why we call it Horatius at the bridge. Your second person is going to be Gaius Mucius. Gaius Mucius is going to sneak into the camps of Lars Porsenna, the king of Clusium, on the other side of the Tiber, and try and assassinate the king himself. He instead, unfortunately, assassinates a scribe. He gets the wrong guy. Brought before the king is going to say, I want you to tell me what are Rome's defense weaknesses. He refuses to do so, and to show that he will not give up information even unto torture, he thrusts his right hand into the fire, allowing it to burn out in smoldering ways, and therefore he gains the name Scaevola, which means lefty. Your third and final hero in these episodes is going to be that of Cloelia. Cloelia is going to jump into the Tiber River, swim across, and get some of those Roman hostages that are being held at the camp, and bring them back over to safety. In a rage, Porsenna is going to claim that he's going to execute all the rest of the hostages unless Cloelia is brought to him. When Cloelia is brought to him, he is so overwhelmed by her bravery, because even a woman can have pietas. This is what the historians are letting us know, in that he is going to obviously grant a ceasefire and release the hostages and withdraw his attack, his siege on Rome. Now, it is now going to be these moments of which we are going to see in the early development of Rome two different factors. But I'll first focus on the factors of the conquest of Rome as a whole into the whole of the Italian peninsula. The other is the interior of society, which is a societal conflict between two classes of people. But first we're going to focus on how Rome ends up gaining territory. It is always defensive imperialism. Rome is not the aggressor, Rome is the one who is attacked, but in its defense it will win, and therefore it will expand. Now, the first people that they are fighting against are going to be the Aequi, a neighboring tribe, and the Volsci. The Volsci are particularly troublesome, as it were. And here, of course, you can see Rome located right here, all along the Tiber River, with all of the various other tribes that are going to be rather hostile to its development. Well, there was a guy whose name was Coriolanus. For various different reasons, he was booted out of the city and he was exiled. When he is booted out of the city and he is exiled, he is then going to default and defect over to the the Volsci and lead a Volscian army against Rome. As he is approaching the city, he is going to be approached by two women by themselves. Their names are Veturia, his mama, and Volumnia, his wife. After a private conversation in which nobody knows exactly what is said, he returns to the army that he is leading, he turns them around, and he leaves from Rome. It is these two women that save the day. The other thing that you need to know right around at the same time, within the next 2 years or so, is that there is this battle called Lake Regillus, and you can see Lake Regillus right there. At the Battle of Lake Regillus, the Latin League, which is a confederation of tribes all in this area of Latium, they all speak Latin, but they're different political units, are going to be defeated by Rome. When they're defeated by Rome, and the treaty that results from it is known as the Foedus Cassianum, it's in your study guide packet, you now have a quite clear establishment of Rome as the big kid on the block, and it is only a matter of time before they are attacked again by now farther afield. The Sabines already been incorporated with the Sabine War, but nevertheless they are going to begin their expansion as the establishment. Now, the most important, perhaps, event in these early days is going to be the event involving Cincinnatus. In 458 BC, my date is wrong actually, the Romans were in a bit of trouble. At Mons Algidus, which you can see is a mountain located right there, a Roman army had been trapped. When this Roman army had been trapped, they then are in an emergency, and the Roman constitution as set up for the res publica says that in a moment of crisis, you can abandon the res publica and the consuls, and the Roman Senate can establish a dictator to single-handedly rule over the armies and the society of Rome. However, they had a stipulation in which the dictator could only do so for 6 months. Cincinnatus is going to be approached while plowing his field, he is a Roman senator, by the other Romans, and say to them, "We offer to you the fasces, the symbol of power and authority, to become dictator and save this army that is trapped at Mons Algidus." He does so in a period of only 16 days. And even though he had the full remainder of the 6 months at his disposal to, of course, gain power, he turns it down. And so therefore, to this day, a symbol of turning over power, when indeed you could have taken advantage, is known as a Cincinnatus moment. As a matter of fact, George Washington, at the end of his second term, there was not in the Constitution a limit the way that we have now to run for a third term. He didn't. Instead, he turned it over, all of his power, to the people of America. That is why George Washington is sometimes known as the American Cincinnatus that you can see there. And this is a statue on the Ohio River in Cincinnati, which takes its name, that American city, from the great hero Cincinnatus. Now, let's go a bit into the interior of what's happening in Roman society. You have a suspension of the res publica, because there is a set of two groups. These two groups are going to be known as the patricians. They are the older established families of Rome. They have all the power, even though they are only about 5% of the population. And then you have the plebeians, or the plebs. And all of Rome on the interior of society is going to be, of course, dictated, and it's going to be defined by the conflict of the orders. That is the term for the struggle between the patricians and the plebs. Well, one of the ways in which obviously the plebs are then being mistreated is that there is not Roman law written down. And so whenever that they are accused of something, or whenever the courts convene, they can just make it up as they go along, always at the detriment of course, the plebs. And so therefore, in this year of 451, the Romans decide we're going to suspend the res publica, and we're going to elect the decemviri, the 10 men, and they themselves are going to have full rule, and they are going to make up Roman law written down. They are going to canonize Roman law, and this Roman law is going to be known as the Law of the 12 Tables. Well, as one can imagine, after they do this, they do not easily step aside. And so, therefore, there is an incident that will cause an end to the decemviri and the Law of the 12 Tables, and this event is going to involve a decemvir by the name of Appius Claudius. And so Appius Claudius was lusting after this poor girl named Virginia, and he had his client, Marcus Claudius. A client is going to be a guy who is under you as kind of like a henchman at times, to claim she was a slave and seize her while the dad, Verginius, is away. And so, after a sham trial in which all the decemvirs, of course, are going to side with their fellow decemvir, it is going to be that Verginius takes a knife, kills his daughter so that she is not forced into a life of slavery to evil Appius, and then, of course, kills himself as well. The outrage was overwhelming, and so therefore, knowing that there was no hope of real justice under the decemviri, it is decided that they should return back to the ways of the res publica. Now, a couple more of the items that are going to lead to the external expansion of Rome. 390 BC, the Gauls. Now, Gaul is the name for modern-day France, and they come in sweepingly to invade Rome and occupy Rome. There are a couple of incidents that are marked by this. First and foremost, Camillus is the defender of the Romans, but to no avail. They are successful to these Gauls, and the Gauls are led by Brennus. It is during this time of trying to, of course, get up the Capitoline Hill that you have another hero besides Camillus, that of Marcus Manlius. He defended the Capitoline, but he was only alerted that the Gauls were attacking that citadel, the high point, the defense point of the city, due to the sacred geese of Juno squawking. I don't know if you've ever dealt with geese, but they can be rather intimidating. And so therefore, you have this incident in which the sacred geese of Juno alert Marcus Manlius and he defends the Capitoline. Now, eventually, they are going to be bought off, and this is one of the most disgraceful moments in all of Roman history, and it is not going to be successfully invaded as Rome for another 800 plus years. And so, in that way, more than that actually, about 1,000 years as it were, but you have this instance in which they are bought off with a bunch of silver, they bring in scales, and all of the silver is placed on it. The Romans say, hey, wait a minute, you're cheating, the scales are rigged to benefit you Gauls. And so we have the famous saying that Brennus gives to the Romans, as told to us by the historian Livy, that's the third time I've mentioned him, is that he says, "Why victis," which means woe to the conquered, woe to the vanquished. Those that are defeated have no recourse. And so therefore you have that incident, which of course is there. By the way, if I have not said it, your third item that you're going to put in is Cincinnatus. Let me spell it for you. Cincinnatus. Cincinnatus, the great hero who put back the fasces to the people of Rome and the res publica. All right. And so at this point, you have now a series of war that is going to, of course, expand out. It is known as the Samnite Wars, and they are fighting Rome over Campania. The region of Campania is right down here, near the Bay of Naples. Baiae, where the Cornelians stay in summer, is in Campania, and it is an incredibly rich farmland. And so the Romans, who are in red, and the Samnites, which you can see there, are going to fight a series of 3 wars. We know these as the Samnite Wars, and they're going to occur in the 300s. You have the first Samnite War, which is 343 to 341. You have the second Samnite War, which is known as the Great Samnite War, 326 to 304, and it is in that second Samnite War that you have the Battle of Caldine Forks, which was a defeat for the Romans, and it was unique in that it was a moment in which the Romans were forced to pass under the yoke. It is a symbolic enslavement. The yoke is the thing that you put on to cattle that you would enslave them to be able to plow your field, as it were. And so, you have also built during the Samnite Wars the very first Roman road. Romans were the best builders of roads in all of Europe to this day, and you can see that it initially is going to go down here to Capua, which is the capital of Campania, but later it is going to go all the way down to Brundisium, and Brundisium is so important because it is the port from which you would set sail in order to obviously go to the east, and particularly to Greece, as it were. Then there is a third Samnite War, but they are eventually going to be defeated as a whole. When they are defeated, now it is going to be that Rome, as you can imagine, is now a little bit bigger. And so again, it is the Samnites attack the Romans in the Samnite Wars, the 3 of them, the second of which is known as the Great Samnite War, but then Rome wins and expands. Your fourth item is Samnite, S-A-M-N-I-T-E. Samnite. You then have the problem of southern Italy. This area is known as Magna Graecia, or Big Greece. Because of colonization, there are more Greeks who live down here than actually in Greece, which is right there. And so, therefore, all of these Greek cities, whenever there is a problem, they call back to the homeland of Greece, and this is going to lead to a series of conflicts known as the Pyrrhic Wars. We're almost done. Hang in there. So, the Pyrrhic Wars is going to be when you have the city of Tarentum that you see right there getting into a bit of a clash with Rome's ally, down here in southern Italy, and thus will call over to the kingdom of Epirus, and that king Pyrrhus, Pyrrhus of Epirus, will come over and in a series of battles devastate the Roman army. The problem is that the battles that he wins are going to be what we call to this day Pyrrhic victories. Pyrrhic victory means that you win, but you win at so great a cost that you will eventually lose the war. And that is exactly what happens. You have the Battle of Heraclea, you have the Battle of Asculum, and then finally you have the Battle of Beneventum. 280 for Heraclea, 279 for Asculum. The first battle, he declared, give me more battles like this and I shall win the war. The second battle is, give me more battles like this, I will lose the war. He won both battles, but it was Pyrrhic victory. We use that term even today. And so therefore you get into a fight with your friend, and your teeth get knocked out, but he gets more teeth knocked out. You won the fight, but boys and girls, who really won? It was a Pyrrhic victory. And so therefore, he is finally then booted out back to Greece after the Battle of Beneventum. Originally that town had been known as Malventum, but they renamed it Beneventum, as in good instead of bad, due to the success that is there. It is at this time, boys and girls, that this is what Rome is going to look like. We've gotten all the way to 275, and that is that you have Roman territory, which is that in red, but what gives Rome its power is that it controls all of Italy via these allies. They are allied people to the Romans, and so we consider Rome to have a control of the entirety of the peninsula, but only those in Roman territory are actually Romans. It is this network of allies, and every single allied tribe or allied city has different terms of an alliance with Rome, different amount of taxes they must pay, different amount of responsibilities that you have. And so by the time you get to 265 therein, you have the entirety of the peninsula due to the fact that they have now defeated the Samnites, then they defeated Pyrrhus and now control all of Magna Graecia, big Greece as it were, and in that way they are all in control. Now back to the last thing, the conflict of the orders. To give an example of how in the very early days this conflict of the orders was so bad is that 494, very often the plebs would secede, i.e. they would withdraw from Roman society and say, let's see how you like it, plebeians, when there's only 5% of the population left and you don't have us. In these secessions, eventually there would be some sort of resolution, i.e. the patricians would give up more power and the plebs gained more and more and more and more and more of a foothold of equality under the law. Menenius Agrippa is one famous example, is that in a 494 secession of the plebs, and they usually seceded to the Aventine Hill, he gives an analogy. And an analogy is the fable of the stomach and the body, in that if you don't feed the stomach, the body cannot function. But the only way by which you can feed the stomach is by using your body to feed it in. And so the patricians and the plebs therein need each other. You see the conflict of the orders coming to a definite end in 287 BC, with a law passed known as the Lex, and that is the Latin word for law, Hortensia. And what the Lex Hortensia said was that laws passed by the dominating government of the patricians are now going to be equal to the laws passed by the plebeians. They passed their own laws known as plebiscita. And since plebiscita used to only apply to the plebs, it put the plebs at a disadvantage. But when the Lex Hortensia comes along and says the plebiscita, laws passed by the plebs, were also going to be laws having to be followed by the patricians, now they were on equal footing legally and politically, and thus this brings an end to it. And so right around at the same time, this is what Italy is going to look like right at around 275, and at around the same time you have an end to the conflict of the orders. So our next installment is going to deal with now Rome for the first time expanding beyond the Italian peninsula, and thus we concentrate on Sicily. Your last word that you are going to be putting in for your free 100, thanks for watching this somewhat lengthy video, is going to be that of Pyrrhus. P-Y-R-R-H-U-S. The guy who had fought against the Romans in the Pyrrhic Wars of the late 280s. So, thanks so much for watching, and again, take note of this timeline that I'm going to zoom over again and hopefully see. There it is. And so all those things that I've talked about in a little bit of greater detail. And there you can see the Lex Hortensia down at the bottom right. You can see all the various different people and events that we have come across, etc., etc. Thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you will learn Roman history and take it with you in various competitions that you will have throughout the year. Bye.